On this episode, we talk with Joe Passov, also known as Travelin Joe, who has been writing about golf since 1991, and that moniker comes from his specialties, which include not only golf travel but history and golf course architecture. So we talked with Joe about how he got started as a golf writer. He was a poli-sci major in college, went to law school, and we talk about how he went from being a young lawyer to writing about golf and then focusing on golf travel and golf course architecture, which he's been doing, for 30 plus years. And we also get into some issues in golf travel. We talk about, of course, the seismic event over the last 30 years, which is Mike Kaiser taking the big risk and building Bandon Dunes and the kind of build it and they will come phenomenon that has been so successful, and how that's been, as Joe aptly says, a real sea change. And other trends he's seen in travel. And then we get into some fun golf course architecture stuff and, talk about how that has been such a change from the type of golf courses that he and I both saw when we were younger to now the more strategic approach and the, going back to the golden age of golf courses, all the restoration renovation that's being done by the likes of Gil Hansen, Andrew Green, and why that change has happened. And then we also talk a little bit towards the end about the impact of technology on golf course architecture and where we are on that topic, where we might go from here. So all of that and much more next with Joe Passoff on this episode of Larry the Golf Guy. Well, welcome to another edition of Larry the Golf Guy. And I'm so pleased today to welcome to the podcast someone that I know a lot of our listeners know and have read, Joe Passoff, otherwise known as Travelin Joe, from a lot of his great writings on golf travel, also golf architecture. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Larry, thank you for having me. I know there's a lot of topics to cover, and I'm looking forward to it.
You and me both. So just to give people a little bit of context, as I like to do with guests before we dive into some of the substantive stuff. So you grew up outside of Cleveland, as I understand it, and you sort of started more as a tennis player in terms of sports, it sounds like. How did you end up gravitating to golf? How were you introduced to this great game?
Yeah, I mean, I spent so many happy memories on a tennis court with a lot of competitive, uh, time spent on the court, doing just what golfers do, only tennis. Lessons, drills, clinics, tournaments, travel with junior tournaments, talking about college tennis, and the rest of it. But as I started to realize I was not going to be the next John McEnroe or Bjorn Borg or Jimmy Connors, and I started to appreciate the little bit of golf that I had been playing. It was something that my grandfather loved, and I felt like if I could play a little golf and learn about the game, it would give us a nice bonding aspect. Because otherwise, I wasn't too equipped to talk finance, investments, and the plumbing business. So yeah, I started to play a little bit of golf, a little bit in Ohio, but things really kicked in again, much higher when my family, my mom and dad, moved my brother and sisters and I to Scottsdale, Arizona in 1978.
Got it.
And one of the things that started to kick in at that point that I became quite captivated about was the variety in the playing fields that golf offers. And so, I understood what it took to be a good golfer because I had gone through all that in tennis. And I don't know that I was prepared at that point to duplicate that in golf, although many have. But I was just so taken with the fact that I had grown up with kind of Parkland rolling golf courses. You came out to Arizona, and you had mountain backdrops all of a sudden, and wasn't quite desert target yet, but then started to think about golf and think about how much I enjoyed thinking about golf and traveling to different courses. And I made a trip as a senior in high school, right before I went off to college, with my best friend Brad, who's been practicing law in Phoenix for more than 40 years. And we went to Pebble Beach.
Ah,
And we played Pebble Beach and Spyglass Hill and went up to San Francisco and played one golf course there. And so, here it is, Pebble Beach,
right,
18 years old.
right.
It was $50 to play Pebble
Oh
Beach.
boy.
Spyglass was $22,
Oh
29 if you
my.
wanted to ride a cart.
Oh
So it was a
wow.
long time ago. But more and more, I thought about how much I wanted to see more golf courses, and I love the fact that you could walk in famous footsteps.
Yeah,
That the U.S. Open was held at Pebble Beach, or was going to be. Well, it was in '72, and yeah, Jack Nicklaus did something good there, and I
yeah,
can play that same hole and walk in those same footsteps,
right.
and maybe get lucky enough to do something similar or better than what Jack Nicklaus did. And while that may possibly be a little bit true in tennis, it's not the same, and it's certainly not the same as with football or baseball
Right,
or soccer, and getting
right.
to participate under those circumstances. So probably by about 1980, and I was still playing competitive tennis,
Uh-huh.
but I was getting hooked on golf.
Yeah, that is one of the charms. They're not going to allow you on Roland Garros's clay or at Wimbledon's grass courts, right?
Yeah, yeah, you're going to have to know some higher ups, that's for sure.
So that's great. So you're in here, Scottsdale. Of course, so many golf courses there, and so many built even since then. Obviously, you go University of Arizona, you're poli-sci major, I think, and then you go to law. And so you're in law for a little bit. So before you pivot back to golf, maybe tell us kind of what that journey was like, how you sort of went to law and how you ended up pivoting back.
Man. I mean, some people kind of know exactly what they want to do from age 10 years old or 15 or something. And um, I really did sense that I wanted to be an attorney. Uh, Although there was no attorneys in my immediate family, we had lots of friends growing up in Ohio that did that. Happened to see a movie when I was 12 called The Paper Chase
Oh,
that
yes.
involved John Houseman as a stern
Yes.
Professor
Yes.
Kingsfield at Harvard,
Right.
and I just liked all of that aspect. I did debate team in high school, balancing other things,
Sure.
and it felt and looked like a natural fit for my skill set and interests and everything. And then once once I got to law school, and then would clerk in the summers, and came to understand that there is a big difference between the practice of law, the business of practicing law, and the theoretical aspects of the study of law,
Right.
and that real life isn't like Perry Mason or LA Law as it turned
Right.
out while I was in law school.
Right.
And and it just became challenging working up the energy each day, because I knew, unfortunately, my heart wasn't into this. It was not a good fit for. I didn't seem to have a tremendous love for confrontation at the time, which is very helpful if you want to be a successful attorney. Um, and I just could not get all these golf images out of my brain, thinking, oh, if I had only studied landscape architecture and learned those skills. But I knew, somehow you still have to make a living, and let's just see what transpires. So, had a couple of brief moments. I would call it a cup of coffee with the legal
You use
profession.
a baseball analogy, right? A Major League Baseball analogy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But just knowing, it was a feeling that I don't want to do this every day. I don't want to
Sure.
come into the
Yeah.
office and fight about a battle of experts and how much this worthless piece of property is actually worth out in the desert, and things like that. And I mean, it just became a series of the most remarkable coincidences to allow me to leave the law and enter golf writing. I mean, it was almost simultaneous.
So that's what I'm interested to hear. So and I totally respect everything you're saying. It's good. Whatever you end up as a career, I always think it's really important to have a passion for it. So you sort of realize you don't have a passion for the law. How did you end up pivoting? I mean, what set of circumstances enabled you to pivot to golf and golf writing?
So when I was a second year law student, uh, Golf Digest magazine had asked for reader feedback on some of their candidates for best new course of the year. So
Okay.
they were going to have ranking panelists or editors or whoever determines the winners, but I think they just wanted to get a little reader feedback. Well, I mean, I'm in law school. I'm doing my fair share of writing, and I thought, well, this is a chance for me to write a little bit. And somebody at Golf Digest is going to have to read this,
Right.
because I'm sending it. They asked me. They asked all readers, and as it turns out, I wrote about um, a new course that had opened that year in Scottsdale called Troon Country Club.
Yeah.
That was Tom Weisskopf's first involvement in design with Jay Morrish, the
Morris. Right.
architect.
Right.
Wrote about Harbor Town being underrated, in my view, and then a municipal course in Denver called Welsher, which was designed by Donald Ross. But when I played it, I think all that was left was his name,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
opposed to any of his design features. And I said, I think that's overrated. Okay, well, I sent it off, and great, somebody'll read this. I mean, six single-spaced pages of
Wow.
dense
Wow.
analysis on why
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, somebody did read it and passed it upstairs because 5 months later, my dad, there was something mailed to the Scottsdale address, and my dad sends me this thing in the mail while I was in Lincoln and says, "Sorry, Joe, opened by mistake, thought it was a bill." Something from Golf Digest. Well, it was Golf Digest, and it was not a bill. It was a letter on letterhead inviting me to become a member of the ranking panel
Wow.
that
Wow.
ranks America's 100
Yeah.
greatest golf
Sure.
courses. This was so ridiculous as a proposition. I thought some buddies of mine, because
Oh,
they
it
knew
pranked
how
you.
much
Yeah.
I was,
Yeah.
it was a
Yeah.
prank. Well, no, it was true. That became an introduction, a calling card, if you will, for me to start going to see golf courses I would have never seen, private clubs.
Right.
I didn't have a connection in golf otherwise. I was a modest player. I just happened to write well about three courses that, about design. So Golf Digest got me into seeing things, comparing different styles of architecture with all the new course candidates during the heyday of the Pete Dye era. And so many new courses opening in the mid to late 80s and making me think about what I liked and what I didn't and why. And then 2 years later, I was involved in this large law case, the Dalkin Shield,
Mm-hmm.
a birth control device that had injured thousands of women.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the women on the list that I had to basically ask a series of medical questions and interrogatories, if you will, was the editor of our Arizona Golf Association magazine.
Mm. Okay.
So we had a nice rapport, and I told her I'm interested in golf and I'm a member of the Golf Digest panel. And I said, if you ever need any help with writing, a story, let me know. I'd love to take a shot at it. Well, 2 weeks after that, she calls me and says she has a conflict, and she has to go to Tucson to cover an LPGA event. Would I be interested in covering the tradition at Desert Mountain,
Right.
a
Right. Right. Yeah.
senior major back
Major. Right.
then?
That's right.
So 1991, I've got my first assignment. And in addition, I pitched the owner, the publisher of the magazine, to do a second story while I was out there. A little labor law story. Is the Senior PGA Tour a closed shop?
Ah, yeah.
Okay, and interviewed some of the guys on the range
Yeah,
and this and
yeah.
that. So that tournament, Jack Nicklaus happened to come from 12 shots
I
back
remember. Right,
after
yeah.
36 holes to
Right.
win by one. And if you can't write a decent story when that happens, you really stink and you should not pursue this any further. So things went well in that regard. And even though I still had legal stuff in my life, somebody came in after a national magazine uh, called Golf Illustrated went under. The parent company filed for bankruptcy. All the titles were up for grabs. And someone out here decided to buy it and also buy the Arizona State Golf Association magazine. Um, and in looking for some talent, some people wanted to move out from New York uh, to do the new Golf Illustrated, and other people didn't want any part of leaving New York, would find something else to do. And so I was handy, and I had helped the new owner out with a project, and all of a sudden they asked me if I wanted to go cover the Ryder Cup in 1991.
Oh
Remember that
God.
one was called The War
What's
by the
War at
Shore?
the Shore, Dave. I can still picture Dave Stockton in the ocean
That
with the.
is
I can still think of Calcavecchia's meltdown against Montgomery. I mean,
all,
lots of, and of course Irwin and Langer coming down to that last putt. I mean, I remember it well.
all of it. All of it. And I was there and the wind was blowing
Yeah,
and Kiowa's Ocean course was as hard as any golf course that
right.
those guys had ever seen. And I had the time of my life with a
Oh
photographer and an
God.
expense account.
Yeah.
And so I came back and what I filed for a guy named Al Barco,
Oh,
who was the
famous, very
editor. Yep.
famous guy. Yeah. I've got his
Long
books.
time.
What was it? Golf's Golden Grind or something. I mean, I've got some of his
Yep.
books. Yeah.
Yep. History of the PGA Tour and
Right.
others. And Al was just good player, crusty editor,
Yeah.
and all of that. But and he liked what I submitted. And the folks that gave me this gig asked me if I wanted to come do this full time. And again, I mean, I was not exactly beating a path to a Supreme Court appointment or anything else as a lawyer. And so I thought I would love to do this and just try it for a while and just see. My gosh, I could write about golf, and that's how it got started late in 1991 into early 1992, and now I'm a golf writer, and for the most part, leaving the law behind.
That's an awesome story. I love that. So you have focused on architecture and travel. And I mentioned at the top Travelin Joe, and I think you had your eye on design column as well for Golf Magazine. How did those two areas become your two focus points?
Well, for everything I did love about golf, the professional game, watching those guys, I had not devoted the same kind of energy towards, say, getting better at golf or really good at golf. So instruction, I mean, I paid attention to it. Equipment, yeah, sure, everybody's interested in what's new and what'll help you, but what I became fascinated with was the history of the game, and I love American history and world history, but so golf history was a natural. And where does history take place in golf, but on golf courses? And what separates one golf course from the next? Usually it's budget, but it's also the inspiration of an architect that chose to place features in a certain way. And I became fascinated with the differences from one golf course to the next. And then there was travel, which I had done growing up as a kid and playing tennis. Not too much exotic travel through tennis, but our family took some fun vacations. But I knew I had never been abroad. Um, had been to the islands and this and that. And my grandmother had always said that, you know, educated people travel. They want to see different cultures and the rest of it. And all of that, given golf's global reach, appealed to me. So a new editor took over for Al, who just didn't want to be in Phoenix anymore. And his name was Mike Corcoran. And we put in some seriously late hours with a monthly magazine to try to get caught up because there were subscriptions to fulfill and changing things to where it would be more appealing on the newsstand. And I worked long, long hours with him. Was not unaccustomed to working long hours in my previous profession, but this was fun. This was just sitting around talking about what are we going to do in the next issue and how do we get this done? How do we make the writing better? When it was all over, I had been helpful to Mike and we had become friends. And he said, okay, we finally have a little breathing room. Joey, as he said, what do you want to do for this magazine? I said, Mike, I want to travel. He said, okay, you're the travel editor. It was that simple. And within 12 months, I had gone to cover my first Masters,
Wow.
1992, the US Open at Pebble Beach,
Yeah, yeah.
1992.
There was a little wind
Had
at that
gone
one. Yeah, exactly.
uh, had gone to Scotland and played Royal Dornoch,
Oh, wow.
but ultimately covering the Solheim Cup
Yeah.
at Dalmahoy in Edinburgh, and then gone to Australia and played Royal Melbourne. And
Oh,
this all
wow.
happened in the first 12 months that I was a golf writer. And again, I mean, talk about ridiculously good fortune.
It's
And
great.
so knowing how much I enjoyed time with architects, um, I had a brother-in-law who was an architect, a golf course designer, and getting to meet other people in the business locally and traveling, and then starting to talk to them for stories. And again, this was somebody I couldn't wait to wake up in the morning and get to what I was going to do that
That's
day.
awesome.
So it was awesome. It's now a long time ago, but that was what the history, travel, and architecture all kind of coalesced with my interests and the incredibly good fortune to be able to pursue those interests on somebody else's nickel.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to dive into both of those topics. But before I do that, I'm just curious, given, you're starting in 91 and, at that time, we're pre-internet days. And I mean, my dad, who I learned the game from, when I was 9 years old, started subscribing to Golf Digest. And so, and I've been getting Golf Digest and Golf Magazine forever. And back in those days, I couldn't wait for the monthly issue to come and just devour it and everything like that. And all the stuff that Golf Digest had, the Jim Flick and Tosky and Snead, all the teaching panels, they had all the top 100 courses. I couldn't wait for that when that would come out and all that stuff. And of course, I had to wait a month until it sort of came out. And now, over time with the internet, so much has changed. I mean, all the legacy magazines, generally in the industry, as struggle. And, I mean, I look at how thin, the magazine is now. And when I get the magazine now, I realize, shoot, 70% of this I've already read online because they're publishing it kind of almost more real time. And it's so different, let alone all the different outlets that have come on, people like No Laying Up and Fried Egg and stuff like that. It's such a sea change. I'm sort of curious, you've kind of witnessed all of that sea change throughout your career. You've obviously navigated it very well from the days where it was just a monthly thing to now all this online stuff and everything. I'm just sort of curious, kind of your take on that and, kind of how that's affected you professionally over the years, this dramatically changing landscape and kind of how you navigated it.
an incredible setup for this discussion, Larry. When you think about when I got started in the business as an employee writing about golf in an era before we had cell phones or laptops,
Right, right. Sure.
before there was Wikipedia to help steer us in the right direction as we got moving, um, it was just night and day different. I, I was just like you. There was so much anticipation that would build for the top 100 courses issue that I could barely stand it to see what had moved in and what had moved
Right,
out, and the rest of it. And so, back then it was society as a whole, attention spans were different because we didn't know otherwise. And so, besides Golf Digest and Golf Magazine, and then there was that weekly, which was a thrill to get for us who were really into it, Golf World.
yeah, I got that too. Right.
Ultimately,
Yeah.
Golf Week came on the scene. But as big a player in those days was Sports Illustrated,
Right. That's right.
because you had the great Dan Jenkins,
Yes,
among others,
absolutely. Absolutely.
telling us about what was going on at the majors. And before Dan, well before Dan, and then later his essays in the New Yorker, Herbert Warren Wind.
Absolutely.
So when I think of reading about golf, and there were always fun, fantastic instructional tips that could really help you, in Golf Digest and Golf Magazine. And I mean, the best tip I ever got that has stuck with me to this day was Ken Venturi in Golf Magazine. Put your arms in casts for chipping,
Right,
so
right,
that you
right.
don't get wristy and so forth. I mean, I remember that stuff. But back then, reading was something you could picture. I'm going to settle in with a 10,000 word Herbert Warren Wind
Right,
essay on the New
right.
Yorker with the
Absolutely.
fire blazing
Right. Absolutely.
and and Dan Jenkins wrote some pretty thorough, beautifully written, analyzed, reports on the majors. So that's what we knew, and that's what we aspired to.
Right.
Was great writing as great communication. When you look at what's happened now, and architecture was the tiniest subset
Right.
of basically travel, which was a somewhat tiny subset.
Right. Right.
Everything has changed. And everything has changed, as nostalgic as I might get.
Yeah.
It's
Me too.
changed for the better.
Yeah.
There are so many outlets, there are so many talented people that decided to pursue these means of communication, video and graphics, lighting up screens that we would have never dreamed of. So, as far as how I've navigated it, I'm still as close to a dinosaur as you could get, if you will. Part of that, my duties at late in my tenure at Golf Magazine, I couldn't really, I wasn't permitted to branch out, whereas others were trying to find an audience with new ways of reaching people. And these ways became really fun, means of interacting. You didn't have to sit as a passive observer. You could get involved and offer feedback and join clubs, associated with that. And in addition to the outlets, the platforms that we just discussed, there were other means such as Golf Club Atlas,
Yeah.
on as a website for people who, oh my gosh, there are other people just like me that think about this stuff and argue about this stuff. And so, for whatever you think it is, and there's always going to be some negativity associated with bad apples and that sort of thing, all of these things have made golf more fun, more accessible, more in the now. And, I did my share of video work in the day. Um, Social media, I mean, sometimes you got to shout to be heard. Sometimes it's more that you are first rather than correct, and those other things. But that's not just exclusive to golf. But
For sure, it's not. Yeah.
where we've gone with golf in that direction has just made it, and these somewhat esoteric topics, so much more um, available and accessible to people that it's just comfortable. And the friendships made through those outlets, it's changed lives.
No doubt about it. And I know, in addition to all the positions you've had at like Golf Magazine, Links Magazine. I know you've got that show, right? Backspin, the golf show. So you have a radio show. So you yourself have gone in some of these different areas, right?
Sure. I mean, there are some dinosaurs that are still trying to make their way. I just discovered some new prints in Texas. Um, but yeah. I mean, I've always felt comfortable communicating.
Yeah,
And so whether it was doing videos at Golf Magazine, at for travel for major championships, I did co-host Backspin the Golf Show for 4 years, which was an actual radio show
right,
here
right,
in golf, still
right,
going. I co-host the Links Magazine podcast,
right,
and
right.
and I think if there was one takeaway from all of that is just I have a lot of energy and enthusiasm for the topic, and I love to share it. I
Yep.
really do. Would I like to find another outlet or two, to do more of that? Of course. But the fact that I still get to do that it's so much fun dipping into my bookshelf,
Right,
my
right.
memory banks, and
Yeah.
and the rest of it, for people that appreciate that kind of material. Um, it's still a joy to me, and I'm not a young lad anymore.
Well, let's dive into a couple of these two topics or two big subject matters that you have written so many wonderful things about golf travel and golf architecture. And for people who don't know, I mean, you won the Donald Ross Award for the American Society of Golf Course Architects, so you are held in high esteem indeed by those folks. But let me start with golf travel. So. I didn't, although I grew up playing golf from a young age, we didn't really travel to play golf, but I remember reading Golf Digest. Oh, there's a place called Doral in Miami. There were these sort of, big sort of golf resorts, but kind of, in sort of the normal places you would expect. Pebble Beach, of course, you mentioned going to, and then I think we've got to sort of talk about the great Mike Kaiser because, he has an idea after he's very successful business guy in Chicago. And I know you know him way better than I do, but he was the founder of Bandon Dunes a little more than 25 years ago. I think it was 99. Of course, I'm sure you've been there, but I know you've been there a bunch of times. I have too. Just saw Megagane, get her women's amateur, watching it beautifully I don't know, she played beautifully, but the course, I just loved watching that, how firm and fast it was sort of playing. But he builds it in the southern coast of Oregon, which is sort of not exactly the easiest place to get to. It's a spectacular coastline. Everyone thinks of Big Sur and Pebble Beach, which of course is spectacular too. But there haven't been any developments, at that point in southwestern Oregon and the coast. And he builds it. Of course, now it's grown and grown. But he started with Bandon Dunes. David McClay Kid, no one even knew who he was back then. Builds this spectacular course. And it's, I kind of always thought about it as it's like the Field of Dreams movie. If you build it, they will come. I mean, and boy, have they come and they keep coming. And any of us who have been there, can understand why. And of course, he's gone on to, the place in Wisconsin, the place over in Canada. But I mean, as I'm curious your take on this, are you surprised at how successful this has been? I mean, it was a pretty big, um, dare, I guess, gamble. I don't know. I mean, to go build a course like that in such an out of the way place, but man, has it been successful and kind of huge, important phenomenon, right?
Larry, Mike Kaiser and Bandon Dunes is the sea change in golf travel. Um, I did a story last year for the Southern California Golf Association's Four magazine,
Right. Right. Yeah.
celebrating 25 years of Bandon Dunes, and he did. He changed everything. Mike Kaiser's who I wish I could be when I grew up, because when I got to talk to him about what he loved in golf and how his thinking evolved and how it came to Bandon Dunes, it was like, Well, yeah, that's kind of how I think, except you're successful and actually uh, a risk taker, and I'm not. And oh my goodness, that's exactly what it was. It was an enormous risk. And anybody that said at the beginning, this is going to be great, this is going to work, is is less than truthful.
Yeah,
It was his passion project after a business life where he had done well. And again, this is all, Mike Kaiser, where he took a trip or two to Scotland and Ireland from Chicago, and the golf that he played made him think, I don't understand why the golf we have in the
why it's
US
not
is
like
so
that.
prized
Right, right,
when I am having, as he says, so much fun trying a dozen different ways to play this hole or that, and the emphasis on walking
right, right.
and
Exactly.
and all of these things. And he went looking for a long time a suitable piece of property where he could fulfill his dream, this vision of having something like that, an experience in the US. So he already knew that there was a good possibility people would come if it was done right, um, because he had seen Sandhills, which was the groundbreaking effort, game
Right. The
changer
core and
from Core and
Crenshaw problem.
Crenshaw,
Right. Absolutely right.
middle of nowhere, Nebraska,
Right.
but it was private and it was quite private. So Mike saw what was accomplished there, said, I can do this. I would like to do this, but for public course players. He had done his own 9-hole course uh, in Michigan,
Michigan.
near
Right.
not
That's
far
right.
from Chicago, called the
Right.
Dunes.
Right.
And so he had some experience in building from scratch. But even that, he was looking for an architect and a building team that would absolutely knock it out of the park in a links experience. And yeah, finding a complete unknown then named David McClay. And I had known David's father,
Oh, wow.
Jimmy from Glen Eagles.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, folks are thinking this is insane. You are entrusting this piece of property to
Right.
a novice, if you will.
Right.
And everybody knows the rest of the story. But not only did David ace this test, but pictures went out. Little marketing tools went out to the golf writers, inviting them to come up after the PGA was at Sahalee in
Right.
'98 near
Right. Right. Right.
Seattle.
Right.
Word started to spread. Writers were gushing, one over the other. You can't even believe this place. But Mike Kaiser also knew that one, golf course is a curiosity, two is a destination.
Right. Right.
And so, because things had gone well enough, he had bucked everybody's advice and made it walking only, and hired Tom Doak to do a second course, Pacific Dunes, which incredibly, in many minds and rankings, surpassed Bandon Dunes, not by a lot, but by enough to elevate it. And then the rest of it went on and on. But again, we could spend another 20 minutes on this topic, but it changed perception so dramatically about how far we would go for the purity of a golf experience like Bandon Dunes, where for a good while it was easier for East Coast people to get to Scotland than it was to Bandon
Right.
Dunes in
Right.
Oregon.
Right. Right. Right.
So the chance and risk he took with spending that kind of money and establish some lodging and get the word out and waiting to see how it unfold. The number of people who played it in the first 12 to 18 months so far exceeded expectations. They knew they were onto something, and we have now seen the continued growth of similar destinations, both involving Mr. Kaiser and not,
Right.
but that same extension of the Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to bleed for 1 minute into topic we'll get to in a few minutes on golf architecture because you mentioned Pac Dunes. Because and Tom Doak, who we'll talk more about when we get to architecture. But I mean, to Kaiser's credit, I think I have this story right. I think it's directionally right. You know, Doak, I think when he was laying out that back nine at Pac Dunes, came to him with two different routings. And, you know, one was more of a conventional routing, but he said, as I'm remembering the story, Mike, if you really want to use the land the best, this is what we should do. And for those who haven't had the pleasure of playing Pac Dunes, I personally think that back nine is as good a nine holes of links golf, you know, frankly, outside Royal County down and a few other places that I've ever played. I just think it's spectacular. And, you know, it's a very unusual routing, right? It's got, you know, 10, 11 back-to-back par threes. I think there's only two par fours on the back. If I'm remembering, I think it's three fives, four threes, and two fours, something like that. But I mean, it's a very unusual ride, but it's spectacular. And I mentioned it just in this segment because to give Mike the credit, right? You know, he again kind of apropos of, you know, the risk taking, you know, he had Dokes. That was a really unconventional way to route those nine holes. And he said, Tom, if you think that's the right way to do it, let's go with it, right? Something like that. I think that's close.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. And it was another significant change in perception because for the previous 20 to 25 years, if you will, the best courses in the rankings that were being built were typically by Jack Nicklaus,
Right,
uh, and of course the Jones family, Trent Jones Jr., Reese Jones. His dad was still active somewhat into the 90s, and then Tom Fazio.
right,
And typically those clients involved real estate,
right,
and inevitably conventional routings are what sold, which meant 36 on the front,
right,
36 on the back,
right,
two
right,
par threes, two par fives. And I mean, it was like, you know, as formulaic as you can go
right.
while still trying to inject variety into those sequencing. And Tom Doak, who came from all that study of all of those golf courses across the pond where there were no conventions,
Right.
and said, here's what the land is telling us to do. And
Exactly.
Mike Kaiser ultimately saying, go with it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Before we sort of dive into architecture, just on travel generally, I mean, you know, we're totally in agreement. You know, it is the sea, Bandon was the sea change, and as you said, there have been other similar ones. Anything else notable that to you as you've looked at golf travel and resorts over the years that you've sort of seen? I know, like with everything else with the internet, there's so much more information out there, but I mean, you know, than there was. But anything else that pops in your head in terms of anything notable that's changed?
Well, I mean, since I started this and we did magazine surveys, you know, in the 90s, many more women are playing and traveling, both buddies trips with women for golf, which was just about unheard of when I started in the business. A little more family golf travel,
Hmm.
where that was not as much. Some of the diversions that you get, they're still buddies trips, and I know folks who just want to go to Scotland and play 36 a day.
Right, right,
But in resort golf, the offerings have significantly expanded from short courses. And again, Bandon was a leader in
yeah,
that.
right.
So you don't
That's
have
right.
to do another full 18. We've got a 9 hole or 12 hole par three or a couple of par fours or something like that that make it a little more fun to do that second round in a day. Um, and then the sophistication of travelers now to understand that the old cliches are not going to work from the marketers, and that you've got to speak golf and have a golf culture to appeal, and that includes conditioning and a greater tolerance. Not every traveler wants to see brown grass,
Right.
of course, other than when they go to Scotland, and that's okay. But firm and fast in both architecture and in travel, and people are getting to understand a little bit more that it's not only acceptable but preferred. So I think those are some of the things I've noticed in travel,
Yeah,
uh, and so there aren't any surprises anymore. It's all available
right.
because somebody is opined on it, or there's a website, you know, that shows it in photos.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So let's turn over to golf architecture, where you've written so much and so knowledgeable, and we're not too far apart in age. And yeah, I remember you were ticking off some of the people that I think of, when I was young, the sort of classic, golf architects, Trent Jones, a family, the two boys and the dad, and Fazio for sure. And conventional, but very, long, just sort of lush, long park. I mean, I grew up in the Northeast. You grew up in Ohio. Parkland type courses. That's what dominated, the top 100 for many years. And it's sort of been this change over time you've seen where now. There's this sort of going back and appreciation. It's not sort of building the new monsters. Maybe Firestone would be a great example, of sort of what, architecture was back then, long par four after long par four. And, now it's sort of like, we've gone back and, Gil Hansen, Andrew Green, probably leaders in sort of the restoration, renovation of golden age golf courses. Tom Doak, obviously, we mentioned him, important guy with his confidential guide, to golf courses where he spared no criticism of, some of the, sacred cows, so to speak, of golf courses. It's really been dramatic change to me. And now, you touched on a lot of this stuff, the ground game is more important, the angles, the strategy and stuff. It seems like it's been a real sea change. I mean, as you look at it, I mean, I assume you sort of see the same thing. I mean, what do you think caused all that?
Yeah, I'm going to point to education with Tom Doak, with another old friend and colleague, Brad Klein,
Yeah. Oh, sure.
who
Yeah.
had a forum with Golf Week as
Right.
the
Right.
architecture writer and ratings editor for a long time. Mike Kaiser following in on that. And here's how it did evolve is because we had a certain way of playing golf where we used the best available property typically before World War II. So there were not environmental concerns. Population reached them either easily or by train. And most of the great courses that held championships were seaside courses across the pond. And of course, that's where golf started here as well. Best golf on Long Island. It was costly to build inland courses, um, in the early years because you just didn't have the earth moving equipment and removing trees and rocks and so forth. So a lot of that stuff got left in place, which could be charming in one sense, but also awkward. A lot of blind shots because you just didn't have enough, and it was considered sporty in those days. So after World War II, improvements in golf equipment meant folks were getting the ball airborne much easier. And in designing golf courses, the perception for about 25 years of greatness was tied to toughness.
Right. That's right.
And even the early Golf Digest top 100s were the toughest 100
Right.
courses
That's
or
right.
the 100 greatest tests of golf,
Right.
as
Right.
opposed to the 100 greatest golf courses. So in that era, the giants, Robert Trent Jones Sr. and Dick Wilson,
All right.
um,
Dick Wilson. Sure. Yeah.
were building courses that match that appetite for longer, tougher, challenging is better. And those are the courses that will attract championships and earn the respect of the pros. And so a generation or two got it through their heads that this was the best in architecture. And other significant golf courses from the golden age got reworked, remodeled, redesigned, renovated, whatever term you want to match that. And so, in Trent Jones's case, a lot of the greens were elevated. Dick Wilson's often were, but protected in front. And yes, that called for a certain approach shot that had to come in high.
Hi.
And
Right.
you weren't going to get away with, a lucky ground ball that would wind up finding the putting surface. But there was a practical reason for building those greens, and that was to be able to get them to drain
Right.
on properties that weren't very well draining, heavy clay soils or, whatever the case may be. At least we knew the water would come off those greens, and that's why they were propped up somewhat. And and so the greatest courses from that era typically fit that description. So if that was the Dunes Club in Myrtle Beach, if that was Firestone in Ohio, um, and then and then came a hybrid of sorts, which was Spyglass Hill,
Right.
which Trent Jones designed, but it was on sand,
Right.
and so he was able to actually route holes a little differently. But take that through a 25 to 30-year period, and folks just started to think about it and ask questions. And Tom Doak, who got the Dreer Scholarship and went over to Scotland and Ireland and England and studied and played and caddied, and he wrote about it in his first confidential
Right.
guide, privately distributed in the 1980s.
Right.
He said, I don't understand. These courses called for the same shot over and over.
Right.
Whereas these links courses and courses where there's emphasis on the ground game and options around the green and thinking that you have to do just seem more fun. Um, well, Mike Kaiser picked up on that when he went over there. So Doak didn't hold back in those early confidential
That's for
guides.
sure. Yeah.
And the old guard of architects and club members and board members and presidents who he insulted were infuriated. They had tremendous pride in their
Right.
courses and their
Right.
achievements and their rankings. But the next generation that was reading Doak fresh and said, he may be right about this. And then you had forums like Golf Club Atlas, where that so much of that was fostered and encouraged, and asking questions. Why is this course ranked this high when it's kind of the same shot values over and over? Didn't make them any less wonderful, but they were of a certain type.
Right.
And so, and I'm finally getting into this,
No,
this
this is great. This
diatribe,
is awesome. No, this is great.
but that's kind of what happened is we call it a sea change, but it was a change in thinking that firm and fast is better than lush and green. So many of the clubs and courses in that era got caught up with what I might call the Augusta National syndrome,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
every blade of grass and bunker edge had to be perfect and lush and the greenest green. And we know Augusta has a budget and a certain aesthetic that they're able to do that with, and we all love it. We all love seeing the Masters in the same way. And Augusta, at least, did not have rough. And so we began to at least take that from Augusta and say, well, what fun it is seeing the slopes come into play so much instead of draping them in thick rough. And then you had the, kind of the same shot, just a sand wedge hack, and trying to recover, at least around the green. So more and more, this started to sink in the next generation of influential people at clubs and travelers who said, yeah, I think I'm having fun playing at these courses. And you look at an unbelievably private and wonderful collection of Hall of Fame holes at National Golf Links of America and how quirky can be fun. And then people talk about North Berwick in Scotland with a stone wall running
Well, right.
on a diagonal and all of a sudden, quirk isn't so bad. In fact, it's kind of cool. And maybe it doesn't have to be 18 full visible shots. Maybe it's okay if there's a little blind shot now and again. All of these things that so captivated our great lay of the land architects from the Golden Age, Mackenzie and Ross and Flynn and George Thomas and these folks. And then came along magnificent bunker stylings and
Right.
expansive greens. And it just finally caught on. And so the new great golf courses that have won the awards are usually called something dunes because it's in the sand, it's near the sea, or it's designed that way. But the whole key to it is that the new generation of architects have embraced options, fun for all classes of golfers, where you've got to think a little bit about how you can use that slope to your advantage, or use a sand wedge versus a 7-iron versus a hybrid versus a putter when you're trying to recover around the green. And the new breed has done that beautifully. The next topic on actual restorations, you mentioned Gil Hanse and Andrew Green, along with people like Doak and Core
Yeah,
Crenshaw and some other
yeah,
great ones. But we've rediscovered our love and fascination for the great courses of a century ago, that had the best land to work with, but also showed some genius in the routing and the variety that you got. And I think now that we're all so much more sophisticated, we're craving that kind of experience when we go play golf.
for sure. That's beautifully said. And, kind of along the lines of, courses that are not new, but just restoration, renovation, you sort of see a couple of things, right? You see, mentioned Corin Crenshaw. I mean, Pinehurst number two, if you look at it when Michael Campbell won the US Open there, whenever that was, versus, when Bryson wins, I mean, it doesn't even look like the same golf course. All that rough that they had let grow that kind of ruined a lot of the runoffs and stuff, you see that gone and kind of restored to, its splendor. And of course, the other thing, I'm curious kind of how you see this playing into it. The other trend you've seen, and I guess Oakmont probably is the forerunner of it, is taking out the trees. And Bob Ford, I'm sure you've heard the stories. They do it at night. So the members they do it one by one, so the members wouldn't notice it. But I think when again you look at Oakmont back when was it? Ernie won in '94 versus what
Right.
it looks
Yeah.
like now. I mean, the vistas and everything, it's so different. Of course, it's healthier for the grass too. But I mean, I'm curious. I mean, that's been a pretty significant trend. It strikes me, the tree removal that I think they kind of started, but I see that all over the place now when someone goes in to restore, renovate a course.
Yeah. I mean, hugely controversial. Uh, Big fights among memberships, not just at Oakmont, but it happened at Oakmont. Um, and they were really the forerunners in this. Um, and so you look at the reverence that we had for Parkland golf and how pretty it was. And holes typically were then framed by trees, even those courses that you had to plant them. And that's what happened at Oakmont.
Right,
Yes, it's called Oakmont for oak trees, but it was laid out over rolling farmland. And most of the trees weren't planted until years later and then continued. So what is the debate about? Well, there are some clubs that in the summer probably wish they had held on to a few more trees just for the shade. But the problem with trees, especially the ones that were imported and not native to the region, um, superintendent's nightmare, because their roots spread, cause injury when you strike a root that you didn't
for
see,
sure. Right,
that shade the turf in areas that needed sunlight and wind otherwise to make that turf flourish, and strategy. Those original
right,
courses
right,
designed without trees said, okay, come over this way, and you're going to have a lot of room to hit, but your second shot's going to be tougher.
right,
But if you risk it a little bit over here, we're going to make your second shot a little easier.
right,
Well, then all these bowling alley fairways framed with trees on both sides said, no, you just need to hit it straight. And there aren't any choices. So removing trees or select trees or lots of trees both brought back strategy, better maintenance, and also for the trees that were kept, allowed them to be showpiece trees
right,
rather
right.
than just the other inferior trees, if you will, just getting in the way of the proceedings. So that was one of the reductions that we've seen over the last few years in architecture. And there's still folks that'll fight back against tree removal, but more and more as people are being educated, the benefits of having fewer trees and often, almost no trees clearly outweigh, what you had when you were every fairway was lined with them.
Right. So I will get you out of here on this, and I know this is not a small topic. We could have spent the whole hour on what I'm going to bring up now, but just I got so curious. I want to get your thoughts on it, and that's kind of the impact of technology in the game on architecture and golf generally. And again, you and I are not too far apart in age. I mean, I have vivid memories of playing as a junior and in college. And I was lucky enough. Our home course in college was the country club in Brookline. So, which was I've never trust me when I tell you I did not grow up at a course like the country club at Brookline. Far from it. But that in itself, I still remember the Francis we met oil painting in the locker room, and all the metal spikes on the wooden staircase, all the holes. Anyways, fantastic place, of course, but playing a course like that with persimmon woods and balata balls, you could snap hook a persimmon with a balata ball you just can't do it the same way with a 460cc driver in today's equipment. And it's the game is so changed, and I just curious, and obviously it's more of an impact. It's less for you and me. I mean, to me, it's sort of like helped reverse the aging phenomenon a little bit with the improving technology. But for the elite players, the elite men players, it's sort of taken the strategy out of a lot of these courses. And of course, they have to go back and build all these new tees and environmental stuff. I mean, I'm a stone's throw away here in LA from Riviera, and I think it's got to be a full wedge shot from the back tee at 12 to the normal tee because they've had to build all these back tees, because they have the LA Open there. Anyways, I could go on and on, but I'm just curious, kind of your take on the impact of technology and kind of how it's affected golf architecture in the game, and kind of maybe where we go from here.
Oh man, this is
I know we could spend an hour on it.
it is a it is, and I'll actually be as brief as I can on this because to me, um, as much fun as the average golfer has been able to have by the advances in equipment, it has really, really affected. I want to stop short of saying ruined, but negatively, adversely affected so many of our greatest golf courses, championship and otherwise.
Right.
And to think back in 2022 when the country club had the U.S. Open, and I was so tickled. I couldn't quite, the guys weren't complaining about it was unfair rough or the greens were stupidly hard, or ridiculously fast. It was just the right combination with a little weather thrown in, kind of a
Right.
cool, windy Friday, but single digits for 4 rounds was the winning score. And I was so happy for golf and for
Yeah.
the country club and so sad in later that year, a month later, when St. Andrews, the old
Yes.
course, gets
Yes.
picked apart
Yeah.
like because there wasn't enough wind and because these guys are just way too good and hit it way too far. And I'll say guys, the women are doing the same thing by comparison. So um, I just think that it is unfortunate because courses have had to, as they say, build a church for Easter Sunday,
Right.
period,
That's
and
right.
and
That's a good way to say it.
take courses back to 75, 76, 7,800 yards, that kind of flexibility, and you think about how little that play they're actually going to get, yet it has to be maintained. So
Right.
there's extra
Exactly.
maintenance costs and labor
Right.
costs just to say we can hold these guys. And if you give them soft conditions, 75, 7,800,
It's
it doesn't
nothing.
matter.
It doesn't
They're
matter. Right.
still going to tear it apart. And so all you can do without making the greens ridiculous or a ridiculous level of rough, which we've seen in a couple of majors. And Oakmont was just about over the top this year
Right.
with rough,
Right.
but it's contour and it's weather, and you need that around the greens to get people thinking. You need variety. Give them some room on some of the holes and narrow it up on others so it's just not automatic driver, because driver is now maybe the easiest club in the bag to hit,
Yes,
where
it
it
used to
was
be the hardest, right?
the
Exactly.
hardest. So I love a suggestion that has come up a couple of times out there. Um, Lower the tee. Take literally the tee that the guys use the 460 drivers with that are sitting up there like an old scorecard pencil. Take it back down to where it would show some skill again to hit a driver. Um, and so, yep, that's how I would conclude this, is because it has changed. I love watching Rory McIlroy swing a golf club, but I don't enjoy the fact that he hit driver wedge on, on 13 of the 14, whatever it might be, or nine of the 10 par fours. And it doesn't even matter what the yardage is. Sometimes the ball rolls out 80 yards with what they've got going on, and sometimes it's not going anywhere, but the greens are soft. So somehow I would like to see the equilibrium restored a little bit, to where there is more of a sense of the old test, which was, what's a great golf course? I had to hit every club in my bag.
Exactly. Get it. I mean, that's John Bodenhammer also often talks about getting every club dirty. So, exactly. I don't know. I mean, I personally would love to see them regulate equipment a little more than they've done, but that's one that's putting the genie back in the bottle. That has its challenges with all the stakeholders and stuff. But and personally, I don't think bifurcation's a dirty word. I mean, I always say, if Aaron Judge had an aluminum bat, we'd have fatalities at third base. So, I just,
Yeah.
doesn't bother me. But lots of people spending time thinking about that. We'll see where it goes. Joe, I really appreciate, how generous you've been with your time. This has been a great conversation, as I knew it would. Always enjoy reading your stuff. And I know, here in LA, I know you've done the Hillcrest, one of our sister clubs, history, done stuff for Ford Magazine, where I'm at the SCGA, and always love reading your stuff wherever I can. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Larry, it's been a blast. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Take care.
You too.